without the delight in the small to push forward. And I think this equally applies to in our practice, that sometimes very contented with some of the advancement that we may have in our spiritual development. And for this, of which we must always remain humble. And because the spiritual horizon is far, far away. So during the Gama period, the Buddha kindly and patiently taught according to capabilities. And as Master has very often mentioned about this, this being the case that the hearers, although they have realized the level of the hearers at Arahathood, but there is still a way to go. So the disciples followed his teachings and practiced accordingly, and the monks came to embody faith. And that is a faith that in front of us, there's a horizon, but we don't know where the end is. But we know that someone has traveled there. We know that someone has attained the supreme enlightenment, and that's that of the Buddha. And that is the embodying of the faith that we should uphold. So knowing the Dharma, they came and went without difficulties, but like that great aspiration. And that one is that great aspiration. And that the great aspiration is that attain the supreme enlightenment beyond that spiritual horizon. So during the Vaipuya period, he taught the true and the provisional, and provisional being leading to the true. But it was up to them to accept and uphold it in very much the same way as we do right now, that how far we go and beyond is entirely up to us. So this is a journey of self-growth. So the Gama Sutras, which is the second period of teaching, are entirely an adaptation to the capability of sentient beings. And the Gama Sutra thought about the Four Noble Truth and the Noble Eightfold Path. So when someone had affliction, they requested teachings from the Buddha. When someone was suffering, they came to ask the Buddha for relief. So all this teaching here obviously is about suffering, how to end suffering. So the Buddha adapted to the capabilities and know that because people are interested to know a way out, the people are interested to end suffering, and that's why the Buddha then adapted the teachings, talk about the Four Noble Truth. So eventually our minds came to embody faith. And why we came to embody faith? Because we know that when we learn the teachings in very much the same way as we do right now, and we learn the teachings, adapt it to our life, and we know it works. Now, when it works, we know then we have faith, and that's where how it grows. I think then peacefully engage in spiritual practice. So with skillful means, he taught the true and the provisional. And he knew from the beginning people interested about relieve the suffering, and that's their interest. So from that interest that people naturally have, that lead them to embody this faith. So in this sutra verse, that we did not know that in the past when he turned the teachings to hand us his riches, we already were truly Buddha children of the great vehicle, and that's meaning that we haven't realized our full potential. Thus, we had no resolve to seek it because we did not know. So even though we saw these treasures before us, we still did not want them. This is like a poor son who received instructions to receive and be in charge of all those things, but still had no wish to be even a meal for himself. And that referring to in the parable that he has the wages for the work that he does. So therefore the meaning of this is that the World Honored One knew that we were attached to our desires, and desires that we were content or satisfied with what we had and could not, doesn't desire to go further. So second, the skillful means and provisional teachings, beginning with the Four Noble Truth, as I mentioned earlier, taught by the Buddha, already contained the teachings of the Tathagata wisdom concealed within. And this is the provisional teaching because it needed to invoke the interests of people, which was about suffering. They were interested about liberation from suffering, and then slowly lead them towards the Tathagata wisdom and to grow the mind and then embody the faith. They thought they already eliminated the afflictions and attained that tranquil and still state. but it was still a way to go. So third, they thought the Buddha's teachings on that state of wisdom was solely for bodhisattvas, and that's a part that they had. They thought that it's not meant for hearers who had transcendent wisdom, which is higher level wisdom. So this is the part that they realized that they themselves could be able to do that. So in the same way, that what about us as a householder? Again, are we not able to practice as much as we can as someone who is not a householder? And then sometimes there's a questions then we have to ask ourselves, how efficacious can our practice be then as a householder? So the lessons learned, if we can really apply wisdom, the prajna of true emptiness, and then enter the state of wondrous existence, naturally, we will be able to achieve the same level as the Buddha. So then the question is, as a householder, can we do that too? And that's for you to contemplate on. So this story about the black cow and the white cow, I will share with you in my contemplation as to what I understand it to be. And obviously, then Master mentioned is bound by this together by a ladder rope, referring to the rope being like the greed and desires of our minds. So I pick up a contemplation, which I had some time back. And then I thought I'll share this with you in relation to this analogy. So in contemplation here, the mind will think what it wants and pleases, and most of us we do not know that, because our thought will just arise because it's natural, it's the way it does, and not also realizing that sometimes our thought arises because of our own habitual tendencies, and often referred sometimes as the ego. So that depends on one's desire of the heart and emotion of the mind. So the analogy of the rope is the desire and the emotion. And this has always been in my guiding practice, that if I want to have to look at the rising my skandhas, I will always look where the desire comes from and where this emotion arises from. So desire and emotion are intertwined, and to me, that's a rope that ties up the black and the white cows. So the mind can easily entangle with the phenomena that arises, but not realizing that the phenomena are without self and arises from the manifestation of the mind. So what about this self that we have? And the self that we have is very strong because of the ego. The ego has an identity. The ego wants to be recognized. The ego wants to be elevated. The ego wants to be seen. So the moment we have the self, it will always be bound by the desire and emotion. And this comes from the manifestation of the mind. So how real is the ego then? So the heart is desirous, the mind can be easily emotional, and they're all intertwined in between. So to practice the right thoughts, one must learn to transform desire to aspiration. And what do you mean by desire to aspiration? So, so we can say that, oh, we've dropped our desire away. But what about what I desire, spiritual attainments, for example? And so we need to distinguish between spiritual attachment and spiritual aspiration. And something that maybe you think about that, contemplate on that. But if one is without self, then how can there be a rope that ties the desire and the emotion? So a relationship, wholesome relationship, with the precision practice, you are aware not to get entangled with unwholesome matters. Precision practice is by practicing clearly, upholding the precepts, and be able to really understand the little dust like affliction that you have and be able to eliminate that. So therefore, if we are able to do that, although we are not enlightened, but at each incremental level, we'll be able to grow in clarity. So a wholesome character with discerning wisdom knows what to avoid. And this is the part by discerning ourselves, discerning the phenomena, and discerning at all surrounding the conditions that come to us. So unwholesome matters tend to stay away from you because you have a good character, because it doesn't resonate. It's just like the lotus leaf. When you drop lots of water that grows on the lotus leaf, it just slide away. So instead, you tend to attract wholesome company. And that's a vibration that you send up with people with sort of similar characters. That's why there's always a saying, birds of the same feather flocks together. So therefore, time to change your feathers. So which the ordinary minds find boring, yet you find great joy. I remember, I may have told you this story, and there was Dharma sister that I know, and I used to travel together on pilgrimage trips. She was actually a very flamboyant young lady, and I asked her in one of the trip that was in Bhutan. I asked her, um, "You have transformed your character," and she told me what she had the changes she went through. So I then asked her, "What about your friends that you had before?" Oh, you see, they don't resonate with me anymore, and because I don't really go out shopping for all the products and things like that. So, but I do get in touch with them occasionally, but they don't find me interesting anymore. But yet, she found great joy in the Dharma. So, how can that be? That is because your consciousness has grown and no longer interested in frivolous worldly matters, just like this Dharma sister that I was referring to. Okay, God and brothers and sisters, thank you.
And so much, Brother Chin, being so well said. All of us found so much joy with your sharing every day. That's why we are flocking around you. All of